name is Lee Perry, and I go by she, her, hers. And I am a climate activist in Orlando, Florida. I do so many different types of education opportunities, policy review. I have a lot of relationships with elected officials across the state and various organizations, and I'm able to stay connected enough so that I'm on top of a lot of the most pressing issues in our state and try to inform people on every level, whether they really don't understand the nuances of climate change, to experts. The biodiversity decline in my area is what really attracted me to getting involved with environmentalism. I was in college at the time when I started doing various internships and learned about the endemic ecosystems and species here to Florida that, are being eradicated across our state. And as I got more involved, I started to see what other climate-related impacts were also causing harm to our ecosystems here, and realized that we have multiple threats that are kind of culminating into us losing some of the most precious species and natural resources here in Florida. So I felt like I had to do something and decided to dedicate my life to fighting it. I started out my career really talking about conservation and natural systems from our native plants. I worked out in Seminole County for the Seminole County Natural Lands Program, educating kids and doing guided hikes with all different age groups, and thought that I was just going to be in the woods forever doing controlled burns and counting gopher tortoises and just doing the real conservation work. But it wasn't until I started seeing more and more areas being completely clear-cut for development that I realized I can't just be in the woods isolated. I have to get out and start educating people to see that sometimes buying homes in those areas can actually cause a lot of harm. And if I could warn enough people about the damage, then maybe we could organize and push back to make sure that those things don't continue to happen. So I got into climate education through a nonprofit called Ideas for Us, which I was one of the first students to kind of start organizing Ideas for Us. It's now a United Nations accredited NGO that does climate action projects all over the world. And I served there for several years. I'm still on the board of directors as a vice president. And so we started out talking about energy, water, food waste, and ecology, and doing different segments on each of those topics in order to just bring in experts from shoreline restoration projects and why they're essential, to solar workforce training programs and how there's a gap in the workforce. And we just talked about a flurry of different topics. I did that for long enough, but I still realized that in 2020, we were politically challenged with policy-related issues culminating around the environment. And so I got into politics. I started doing issue-based campaigns like the Right to Clean Water Charter Amendment here, as well as the Safe Spoil Forest campaign. There's a beautiful forest here that has a threat of a highway being put through it in one of the most sensitive habitats. So I was in the forefront of getting those passed. And then Commissioner Nicole Wilson was an environmental lawyer who was also running for election at the time, and she asked me to run her office for a few years. And that's when I started realizing that local government is super important. And I'm still involved in policy as well through Energy Foundation as a consultant. I'm their state deputy director. There's just a lot of ways that you can put your life at the forefront of the climate movement in order to see policy move forward, but we still have a lot of work to do. And so I'm just doing everything that I can, everything that I think of, I'm just trying it. And the way that the community is actually responding to that, it's been really great because it's like a breath of fresh air for some people. You see things on the news, you hear all of this chaos that's going on, from social uprisings to immigration to housing crisis and climate crisis related issues. You see all these natural disasters that are happening. It just feels like everything's slipping through our fingers. People get very isolated. They don't want to leave their homes. But I can find a way to tie in the climate crisis to almost every issue because it is all interconnected. And so I try to do educational events so that people feel heard, so that people can try to make sense of everything. And ultimately, my biggest motivator of continuing to do these events all across the region It's because we need each other in order to challenge one another, in order to help push each other to grow and to do a little bit more than we normally would if we were isolated. And the response from the community has been overwhelmingly positive. There's been a lot of wins. I think every time you win in the state of Florida, unfortunately, you're right now pointing a finger at yourself. And what ends up happening is, because we have a supermajority of a very conservative, extremist side of the Republican Party running our state, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that are trying to purposely confuse people around climate change or to preempt any type of actual climate policy. So even though we've had some wins, we've also had some targets put on our backs. For example, in Orange County, I worked with Commissioner Wilson to pass a fertilizer ordinance. And even though it wasn't as strong as I was really pushing for at the forefront of that, it was still a win in comparison to other counties in the state. And we know fertilizer is causing a lot of harm to our water bodies. This last legislative session, unfortunately, they preempted it, but we had overwhelming support from so many different types of businesses, individuals, environmentalists from all over the state. And then, the state saw that we had those wins, and then other counties were following suit. And then, of course, they preempted us last year from being able to even really use our own language in our own ordinance. So there's been wins. We've had a wetland protection ordinance that has been increased. We have a backyard chicken ordinance that we were able to get across the finish line so people can feed their own families without being dependent on the grocery store for eggs. You can have a lot of wins, but as things get more severe across the state, the more people are getting upset, and they do not want us to have any power to change the way things are. In fact, utility companies and for-profit businesses that are ravaging our natural lands and our resources, they actually want right now to grab as much as they can while they still can profit and just gut the state unregulated. And we're seeing these egregious grabs, just pure lust for power and greed. Corporations use their influence to create a flurry of misinformation in order to keep people at bay so that we are confused and unorganized. And I think here in the state of Florida, it's really one of the frontline states for that, which is so ironic because we're also one of the frontline states that are going to experience the climate crisis in the most severe ways. It's really, really hard because a lot of people with common sense are saying, well, I can't stay here. I can't tolerate this. I have to leave. But I see it as a canary in the coal mine situation where if we don't pay attention now in Florida as the prime example of what the whole country could be if we go in that direction, then we will go in that direction. We can't just say, well, this is just a Florida issue or this is just a Texas issue. This is actually an issue that is, our democracy is very sensitive, and this is an issue that can take the whole country by storm. The more wins that these corporations have, and the more that their lusts for our resources and for power continue unchecked. And Florida, for me, I'm not leaving because I think this fight is much bigger than Florida. I think this fight is a global issue that just so happens to be rooted here. And so I'm going to do everything I can to organize my fellow Floridians and take our state back so that we can stomp out this smoldering tinder before it becomes a huge forest fire. With people power, you're able to get some things across the finish line, and it doesn't need to be partisan at all. A lot of times, Republicans are at the forefront of a lot of environmental issues. It's just there's a lot of misinformation out there that might lean people in a different direction, but for the most part, everyone understands the importance of needing to have a healthy environment. The climate crisis is going to and has been impacting BIPOC communities that are low to moderate income since the very beginning, the most, disproportionately the most. And so we just need to say that out loud, number one. Here in Florida, we need to say climate change out loud, but we definitely need to understand the inequities that are happening. And we have so much data to prove it, and so you use the data to inform the legislation. When it comes to communities of color, especially those that are going to be impacted the most and are low income. There's so many resources, thanks to some of the federal packages that have passed, that we can be actively pulling down to make sure that people have the resources to weatherize their homes, to have flooding resilience, to have emergency hubs in their communities so that they don't have to commute as far as they currently need to get to safety in case a storm like what happened in Mexico, Otis, just turns from a tropical storm to a Category 5 in under 12 hours. We need to have a true understanding of what's happening, and then a true plan for the communities that are going to be the most impacted first. Then we need to empower folks to be able to have their feet on solid enough ground to understand the threats, right? Right now, I feel like there are a lot of disproportionately marginalized communities that are just trying to make it right now. They're either living in their cars or they're working multiple jobs. Many people just don't even have the ability to come up for air to think about weatherizing their homes, putting a new roof on. If they're in communities that have been systemically under-resourced for so long and there's just chaos from lack of infrastructure to, lack of transit, they can't get to work. They don't have affordable access to transit. They have gun violence just ravaging their communities left and right. They can't afford to put food on their table because Florida is the inflation, hub of the United States right now. It's like, just pile if you're a person of privilege, pile every single problem that you're facing and add like 10 more problems on the lives of someone who's in one of these communities really struggling right now. And now try to talk to them about climate and resiliency. There's a huge equity related issue when you're trying to have a conversation with someone about climate change. You just need to figure out where's their privilege at first before you come with them with data and talk to them about weatherization grants and all these things, because you have to kind of understand that there are some people that are just trying to make it to tomorrow and they can't even think about recycling. They can't even think about, because they just had 10 shootings this year in their community. They're losing cousins, they're losing sisters, they're, and their houses are already in such disrepair, and they have multiple grandkids or nephews living with them because their parents have had such extreme mental health issues, they're currently incarcerated, or, it's just really, really hard. And so it comes down to the government having to really have an understanding of what those lifestyles are like, and then creating a network of resources and empowering leaders from the community who have the trust already established, the leaders who already live in those communities, to help be a conduit to breaking bread with these individuals and helping them understand what is possible through these grants. That's slow and it takes a long time. We need to start right now. We can't just come in and tell people what they need and how they need to do it, because if you're not from the community, then they just are not going to make the time to really listen to you. I think if given the right tools and the right sources, people are learning how to organize themselves and learning how to build power at a very young age. And so when I'm organizing rallies or debates or what have you, there's so many awesome students that already come equipped with so much knowledge that I never had at their age. I just helped our local Sunrise Movement student group. I helped facilitate, a panel for HD 35. And the students just impressed me with their questions. They were well researched, well sourced, and just so articulate. So young people really give me hope. And quite frankly, just how many people have gravitated towards these events. I can tell Republicans, Democrats, we've had a lot of people waking up and wanting to get involved and have a hands-on approach. And of course, some of the monumental climate policies that have passed at the federal level really bring me hope for what's next. So.